right, how's it going, guys? All right, I got something else. My next topic I want to talk about. I'm kind of excited about it. I'm going to be talking about the length of the sojourn itself, like specifically what is the minimum requirement, minimum amount of years that are really required, and if the 430 years could have started with Abraham or not. And if 215 years, if it started with Abraham, leaving 215 years in Egypt, if that's enough time for the descendants that we see in the scriptures. So specifically, what I want to look at, let's go to, one family line that I've noticed that really is the only one that touches on this math-wise, like can really be convincing of it, that actually the 215 years can't work, it's not enough time, is Joshua. Remember, Joshua was the assistant to Moses, and eventually he became the one to be during the conquest, like in the time of, he was the first, actually second judge technically, first judge in Canaan. So we're looking at his lineage. So he's a descendant of Ephraim. So if we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 7, and first verse is verse 20. So first I want to talk about, it goes into multiple different things. So we'll start with, verse 23. Okay, so so 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 23. Then he went into his wife, which is Ephraim, and she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Beriah, because misfortune has come upon his house. His daughter was Shira, who built lower and upper Beth Horon, also Uzan Shira. Sorry if I'm pronouncing all those wrong. Repha was the son of Resheph, Tela his son, Tahan his son, Ladan his son, Aminhud his son, Elishama his son, Non his son, which in other places it's Nun, and Joshua his son. So we get the lineage. We get, so verse 23, we get Beriah, and then Repha was his son, along with Resheph. So he had two sons there. Tela, his son, Tahan, Ladan, Aminhud, Elishama, Nun, and Joshua. So that's 9 generations. So we'll just do 8 for now, just to count, because Joshua isn't necessarily considered a generation at that point. We're going to figure out the length of time for the sons to be born, essentially. So we have 8 generations till the birth of Joshua. So 8 times 12 is 106. Did I do that right? 8 times 12. Bring out the trusty old calculator. 8 times 12. 96. My goodness. Right. It's 24. Okay. Anyway. 120 minus 24. Okay. So it's a good thing we looked that up. Okay. So 96. So, and then Joshua, the age of Joshua, we're going to judge it to the time of the Exodus. So we know that an age isn't specifically given for Joshua. That's a little bit tricky to figure out. But we can know that he was at least 20 years old in the second year, meaning 1 year after the Exodus occurred, when he was a spy, essentially. The 12 spies, let's see, Numbers 13, verse 6. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to the spy out the land. But Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. Okay, so Joshua's real name was Hoshea. but Moses called him Joshua. And yeah, okay. And you can see Nun right there, his father, N-U-N instead of N-O-N. So it's just a slight difference in like pronunciation. It could possibly be just how it was written. Maybe it wasn't entirely clear or something, or like how Joshua was Hoshea. Maybe Nun had multiple different names as well and sounded fairly similar as well. So we got Joshua there, and then down in down in chapter 14, we get the point where God talks about the curses. Basically, anyone 20 or over is not going to be able to enter the promised land, except for Caleb and Joshua. And actually, something that's interesting. If you notice, I think, if I recall it correctly, God talks about first the people of 40 years. I believe he mentions that twice. And with 40, he only mentions Caleb. But then when he mentions age 20, he mentions Caleb and Joshua. So that's why I'm putting Joshua at very youngest, 20 years, in the second year of the sojourn, or second years of the wandering in the wilderness. So with all that, so we got 96 years for the 8 generations, plus 19, we'll say, if Joshua was 19 at the time of the Exodus. So 96, 105, 115, so 115 years right there. Now that alone, there's an extra 100 years in there. And that's I might not have mentioned this. I'm assuming a very minimum age of age 12 for fatherhood, which isn't very practical, especially when you get 8 generations in a row. But we're just using it as a bare minimum just to see if it's even possible. So, but possibly some of you guys are already noticing that I skipped about there's a little bit of a story before Beriah, Ephraim's son, before Beriah was born. If we go back to 1 Chronicles 7, chapter 7, verse 23, if you recall, he named him Beriah because misfortune had come upon his house. Now if we go to verse 20, the sons of Ephraim were Shethullah and Bered, his son, Tahath, his son, Eliad, his son, Tahath, his son, Zabad, his son, Shethullah, his son, Ezer, and Eliad, whom the men of Gath, who were born in the land, killed, because they came down to take their livestock. Verse 22, their father Ephraim mourned many days, and his relatives came to comfort him. Then we get to what we just read before. Then he went into his wife, and she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Beriah, because misfortune had come over his house. So we got a whole generation before Beriah was even born, a whole list of them. So the sons of Ephraim were Shethullah and Bered, Tahath, Eliada, Tahath again, Zabad, Shethullah again, and Ezer and Eliad. So we'll consider, because we're referring to the time of Ezer and Eliad, we'll take one away. So that's 7 generations. 7 times 12 for basic minimum age, 84 years there. And then Ezer and Eliad, their brothers, based on verse 21, they were, they were taking care of the livestock. And the men of Gath, who wanted the livestock, killed them. So what age could we assume Ezer and Eliad to be? Maybe at the bare minimum 10, 12, 20. I would probably peg them at maybe 12, just to kind of give it a number. There's not really anything like at what age would they be? Like, we know that Joseph, at the time when he was sold into slavery, he was taking care of the livestock, and he was 17 years old at that time. So they could be around 17. I don't know if there's any other examples in the scriptures for ages of how old certain people could be. But if we just say 12, just to have another 12 in there, because I think that's a pretty good number roundabout. So go ahead and talk about it if you want. Respond to me in the comments. But that's what I'm going with for right now. So 7 generations leading up to Ezer and Iliad, and then we'll include another 12 in there, age 12, another generation for Ezer and Iliad till their death. So 8 generations, 96. So we had 115 leading up to Joshua, and then plus 96. So right there we have 211. There's another question as well. What about the age of Ephraim? So Ephraim, he was born, I might not, yep, chapter 41, okay, verse 50. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God had made me forget all my trouble in all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim, for, he said, God had made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, then the 7 years of famine began. And there's a point where it says, I don't know if it's in this, in these verses here, but there's another verse specifically where it says that those 2 sons were born before the famine, the years of famine begun. And it more says that specifically rather than just kind of in order of how it's written. It gives us more direct. So we can be sure that they were born. Joseph was made vizier at age 30. So Manasseh may be born when he was 31. Ephraim may be born when he was 32 or so. So 32, and then if he was 39 or 40, Joseph, I mean, when Jacob entered Egypt, then when Jacob entered Egypt, which is the start of the sojourn, which I'm arguing, then Ephraim would only be 7 years old. So he has, if he's age 12, he has still another 5 years to go before he's at minimum able to father his first son, which was Shethula, I think. So we're at 211. So if we add plus 5 for the other years of Ephraim, we get 216. So already at the bare minimum, absolute bare minimum, for 16 generations plus the age of, you know what, we didn't even add Joshua's age. So 216 for Ephraim, for the extra 5 years of Ephraim, and then the 8 generations until Joshua was born. 216 years, plus 19 for the age of Joshua at the time of the Exodus. And he could have actually very well been older than that, but I'm just doing bare minimum because he was included in with the curse of anyone age 20 and over. But God said, except for Joshua and Caleb. There's a reason why he included Joshua's name, because he would have been 20 or over. And Caleb and Joshua were the only 2 that had faith in God during that time. So with 19 added to our number, we're at 235 years. Right there, it's not possible. That proves that it's not possible for the 430 years to have begun with Abraham, which is very common for people to assume. You'll hear all over the place. Like sometimes people are just kind of take it for granted, and others they're like for sure. Or you'll hear just people say, oh yeah, it's 430 years from the time of Jacob, without any sort of explanation or anything. Like you get a whole array of different ideas. So very, very interesting. I'm not sure, but I feel like as far as I've observed, I'm the only one that's really gone into this depth. If I'm not the only one, I'd love to hear the other people and see their information, and maybe they have a whole lot more compelling information, or maybe they disagree with me while still staying in the scriptures. I'm ready to hear that. So we got 235 years. There's one more thing that I want to mention. So that is that adds to this. So if we go to Genesis chapter 50, verse right near the end, verse 22, we get the death of Joseph. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, and he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. So we have the death of Joseph. We know that he was 39 or 40 at the time of the move to Egypt. Let's say 40 for simplicity, then that leaves 70 years in Egypt with the household, because he was in Egypt before that. Joseph saw, this is verse 23 now, Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons, also the sons of Mashir, the son of Manasseh, who were born on Joseph's knees. So that implies he did not see the fourth generation. Okay, let's do this. 77, because we're taking 70 years from Jacob entering Egypt till the death of Joseph, plus the 7 of the absolute oldest that Ephraim could be. So 77. So Ephraim and the first generation, second generation, third generation, we're giving 20 years for each until the next generation is born. That equals 80 in total. So that's 3 years beyond the 77. So if there's an average of 20 years between all 4 generations until the 4th generation is born, then that like, let's say 19, it'd have to be a little bit more than 19 on average, but say around, let's just say 20. I think you can see that pushes it beyond age 12 for each generation. Because if we do age 12 for each, Ephraim, so that'd be 5 years after the entry, and then 12, 36, that's 41 years by the time that the 4th generation is born. 41 years, that's much shorter than the 70s, than the 70. So we need to consider that verse. It's very important. So it pushes it back even by, let's see, 41 to 70. It pushes it back another 29. So let's add 29 to our total. So we were at 235 plus 29. We're at 264. So 264 is a little bit beyond the 215. It's beyond that by, let me just calculate it so that I don't get something wrong here, beyond it by 49 years. So 49 plus 75, the age of Abraham, he would be 124 years old. Nothing really happened in his life at that time, like the sacrificing of Isaac. There's debates about when that was, but maybe age 10 for Isaac, or I think there might be kind of a range that we could figure out. Some people argue that he was age 20. So, but that would still be earlier than this. Abraham would have been 120 at that time. So, and we're saying the absolute earliest would have been Abraham at 124. I think, like, and again, that's bare minimum, absolute bare minimum. So we had the 16 generations. That's including, actually, that's not even including Ephraim. But if we take away the first 3 generations, because those are already assumed to be 20 around, so that leaves 13 generations. And if we do those 13 generations averaging around age 20, those alone, not including anything else, so already after the death of Joshua, then 13 more generations, we're at 260. So if we do then, for the death of Joseph, add 70, and then for Joshua to be at age 19 at the Exodus, we add 19. And was there anything else? So that encompasses Iliad and Ezer. And I think that encompasses the Joseph before he died, seeing the third generation. So we have about 349 years for an average birth of around 20. That's a lot more practical. And still, there's issues with this, potential issues. Like age 20, through looking through the scriptures and everything, it's not common for each father to have them at such a young age. Abraham had his first son at age 86, which was Ishmael. And then Isaac was born when he was 100. Isaac had his first son at age 60. Jacob, he had his first son, I think it was at age 83 or 84. I did some math on that. It doesn't say it explicitly, but we can figure out based on the age of Joseph, date back to that, and the 7 years of labor that he did under Laban. So 84 years old. And he wasn't married before then. He didn't have any sons, stuff like that. And even then, none of those were any of their firstborns. Abraham was Terah's third son. Abraham was born when Terah was 130. Isaac was Abraham's second born, technically first from his wife Sarah, but his second born son. Jacob was a twin, but he was technically the second one born. And even then, the lineage going to Jesus, like the lineage that we follow, which is going through Judah. Judah was the fourth born, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. So the fourth born, very rarely is it ever going through the firstborn. So I would contribute that also to the lineage of Joshua. Why do we have to consider every single son there being firstborn? It's not practical. And what about some people having daughters? In some of the scripture verses, it doesn't seem typical, because Jacob had 10 sons. Then he had Dinah, his daughter, and then he had Joseph, and then Benjamin was later. But he could have very well had other daughters at that point. It does mention daughters, plural, in some areas. And Abraham had daughters as well. We know that. Yeah. So, and the lineage leading up to Jacob, even to his 12 sons, there's not too many daughters, even for the firstborns, usually sons there. But then when you talk about the length of the sojourn with them being in Egypt, to consider that every single generation, all 16 of those generations, their very first son being born at age 20, no daughters prior, or just the son that we're talking about of each generation proceeding to the next, that eventually leads to Joshua, it's not practical. So we would have to consider in there daughters being born, other sons being born before the generations, the lineage that led to Joshua. So 349 years, considering everything of on average about age 20. I think if we consider more like the age of 30, that would be more practical. And that gets pretty close to 430 years. So you can see a more practical look at Joshua's generations. It argues very strongly that it could not have possibly been the sojourn beginning with Abraham. 349 years, what's that minus 215? 134 years. And then plus 75 for the age of Abraham. Whoa, I did times. Plus 75. 209, so that's 209 years past. So Abraham had already died at 175, so that's 34 years past Abraham's life. So when Isaac was 34. Still, there's nothing really significant. He married, Isaac married Rebecca, when he was 40. Like, there's nothing significant with that, nothing pointing to the sojourn of that we can really look at, like the birth of Esau and Jacob. But even then, yeah, like, you'd be hard pressed to argue for anything else other than the entry to Jacob. Now, there is arguments for possibly Joseph entering Egypt, like when he was sold into slavery. I get into detail. I've actually actively started writing my paper on this, and I've written, I've done quite a bit of research in that area specifically, whether it was with Joseph or if it had to have all the 70 included in, like, all of the generate. If the whole household of Israel had to move, if it's insisting that all of them move, rather than leaving maybe some behind, like for Hezron and Hamul, which we've talked about before, how they had to have been born after the sojourn. If maybe they were born in Canaan, I don't know why necessarily you'd argue for that. I think it's just more so arguing for the sake of still wanting to keep the 215 years. But at that point, there's so much scripture verses against you. Like, it doesn't make sense to hold on to that. It's only if you're really determined to say anything other than Jacob. So if it was started with Joseph, I won't get into the weeds with this, but because there's a lot of scripture verses to kind of look at, stuff like that. Essentially, there's not really any sort of a point to pinpoint. Like, you could say, oh, well, he was 17 years old. We know how long ago that was and stuff like that. Like, it would have been 23 years, 22 years before Jacob entered Egypt. 22 years, that's not a big deal. Definitely all these generations can work. But the point is of how much emphasis there is on Jacob's household entering Egypt. Genesis 46, and it talks about all the brothers talking with Joseph before Joseph revealed himself, and there's just so much detail about that. And then when it comes to Jacob entering Egypt, it says his household, and repeatedly his household, and Israel entered, and Israel, and even Joseph backs that up with things that he says, like, finally my family has arrived. And like, there's a lot of emphasis on Jacob's side, on Joseph's side, on, like, even narratively expressing that everyone came at the same time. There seems to be one specific day when Jacob talked to Pharaoh. It wasn't like over a series of several days. It's like when he entered, then he faced Pharaoh, and then he gave him a place to live. That day, I'm arguing, is the day that Exodus chapter 12 verse 41 says, to the very day. And so, meaning, if the 430 years ended at the time of the Exodus, which was the 15th day of the first month, then 430 years before that, when Jacob entered Egypt, that was the 15th day of the first month. Man, all of a sudden my brain exploded with so much other fine little details and stuff there, but like, I won't get into it now. I don't want this video to be too much longer. That is my argument. I thought this video would be a lot shorter too, but we kind of went into a lot of math and such. So yeah, okay, I should end it here. I won't say what I'm thinking about what the next video would be, because I've changed my thoughts several times. You'll notice with the previous two videos, what I said at the end of what the next video would be, it ended up not being. So I'll just surprise you. And yeah, I got more detail to talk about. So things like, I'll just give you hints, things like, there's a textual variant in Exodus chapter 12 verse 40 and 41. There's we got to talk about the age of Jochebed, Moses' mother. We got to talk about Galatians 3:16 and 17, which I think I touched on earlier, how it says something about Abraham being called, and then 430 years later is when the law was given. So talk about that. And there's probably several other things. I have to remind myself of all of these. So exciting stuff. I love it. I love it. So I hope you guys like it too. Okay. Take care.